No, because the number that landed after Claressa Shields beat Kaye Scott in Atlanta is not just another number floating around boxing Twitter for people to argue about over bad screenshots and even worse math. That number cuts straight through the entire image that has been built around Claressa's recent business talk, her Wynn Records partnership, the public flexing around guarantees, the social media victory laps, and that whole larger-than-life "I'm operating on a different financial planet than everybody else" aura. And if the publicly circulated commission figure that has people talking is anywhere close to accurate, then the real story is not that Claressa Shields got paid well, because $500,000 is real money. The real story is that the public narrative and the public paperwork are suddenly speaking two different languages. And when the person at the center of it is a fighter who already signed a minimum guaranteed $8 million multi-fight partnership, already talked about a $3 million signing bonus, already positioned herself as the face of women's boxing economics, and already sold this Atlanta moment as another history-making proof point, that disconnect stops being gossip and starts becoming a credibility crisis. Because now it is not just about one fight purse. It is about whether guaranteed money got turned into every fight money in the public imagination. It is about whether branding started outrunning bookkeeping. It is about whether the loudest person in the room got caught letting the flex do too much work. And the most uncomfortable part of all is that this happened right after a night that was supposed to be a pure celebration. Claressa back at 160, a win over Kaye Scott, a huge crowd in Atlanta, another headline, another statement. But if the statement the crowd remembers is not the knockout and is instead, "Wait, I thought this was $2 million a fight," then the whole machine has a problem. And when we get to the contract structure part of this conversation, that is the moment where this story stops being about one purse leak and starts exposing how boxing people play games with language on purpose. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Now let's slow this down and set the table the right way, because this is exactly how people get tricked by headlines, fan pages, and personality-driven boxing coverage. Claressa Shields is not some random fighter trying to talk herself into relevance. She is a two-time Olympic gold medalist, a multi-division champion, and one of the most decorated names women's boxing has ever produced. That part is not debate. That part is not agenda. That part is stamped. Reported in November 2025 that Shields signed a historic minimum guaranteed $8 million multi-fight partnership with Solida Promotions and Wynn Records, with Shields calling it a statement about equal respect, equal pay, and equal opportunity in women's boxing. The reporting also made clear that Wynn Records, which houses Papoose, became part of the new public-facing business structure around her career. So from the jump, this was never sold as just another boxing contract. It was sold as a cultural crossover moment, a blueprint moment, almost a new era moment. That matters because once you present your deal as bigger than a deal, once you present it as proof that the whole economic ceiling of women's boxing has moved because of you, every future payday becomes part of your mythology. Fans are no longer just watching wins and losses. They are measuring whether your rhetoric matches your receipts. And Claressa herself kept feeding that mythology. Mid-Michigan now described the partnership as a minimum guaranteed $8 million multi-fight deal designed to blend boxing, culture, media, and entertainment, with her next bout expected in early 2026. That language is important. Minimum guaranteed. Multi-fight. Partnership. Cross-promotional. Those are not throwaway words. In boxing, those words can mean a lot of things, and they do not automatically mean the disclosed purse for one specific night is going to look like the number fans have been repeating online. And this is where the stakes got bigger than just Claressa's personal business. Her 2025 Detroit fight against Lonnie Daniels pulled 15,600 spectators, with Click on Detroit reporting that 71% of tickets were purchased by women and calling it the largest crowd in Detroit boxing history. That is not fake motion. That is real motion. That is market proof. That is the kind of thing promoters point to when they are trying to tell networks, sponsors, and venues that women's boxing is no longer a charity case or niche programming. So when Claressa moved to Atlanta for the Kaye Scott fight, the event was framed not just as another defense or title chase, but as a test of whether she could take that engine into another major market and still move the culture. NEM's pre-fight report leaned all the way into that framing. It called the Atlanta card the first women's headliner and first championship boxing event at State Farm Arena since Gervonta Davis headlined there in 2019. And it quoted Shields saying Atlanta was a huge opportunity to prove what women's boxing could do outside Detroit. Pushed it even further by spotlighting Claressa talking about being the first woman to headline State Farm Arena and saying she could sell out 18,000 plus people. So the whole public pitch around this night was legacy, scale, crossover, and business growth. Not just can Claressa win, but can Claressa turn herself into a national live event force whose economic power matches her public talk? That is the background you need before you even touch the purse conversation. And that is exactly why the temperature shot up when people started comparing the number in the rumor cycle to the image that had been sold. Because if the boxer who has been speaking like she cracked the code of women's boxing finance goes from minimum guaranteed $8 million with a $3 million signing bonus and all this talk around high-end guarantees, to a publicly circulated disclosed purse number that people say is $500,000 for the Kaye Scott fight, then the internet immediately does what the internet always does. It strips out nuance, throws the worst interpretation on the timeline, and says, so who is lying? And that right there is the tension running through this entire video. Not whether Claressa is a star. Not whether she can fight. Not whether she deserves to be paid. The question is whether the public financial story got inflated past what can actually be documented when fight night comes and the smoke clears. Now let's walk through the visible evidence, because before people start doing the usual emotional backflips and acting like paperwork is hate, we need to get very clear on what can be seen, what was reported, and what is being inferred. First piece of visible evidence. The deal itself was publicly reported in concrete terms. Did not say Claressa was guaranteed $2 million for every single fight. Said she signed a minimum guaranteed $8 million multifight partnership with Solida Promotions and Wynn Records. Mid-Michigan now used almost identical language. That distinction sounds boring, but boring is where truth lives. Minimum guaranteed $8 million multi-fight partnership is not the same sentence as $2 million every time she walks to the ring. Those are different claims, and too many people online act like they're interchangeable when they are not. Second piece of visible evidence. Claressa kept publicly leaning into the idea that her business had entered a different class. Recapping her media run before Atlanta, noted that on Cam Newton's podcast, she discussed owning 19 world titles, fighting for 2 more on August 15th, and broadly projecting a much larger business life around herself, papoose, and future plans. Also framed the Wynn Records deal as a major crossover move, with executives talking about brand expansion and her moving into music while staying in boxing. That all feeds one very loud public message. Claressa Shields is no longer just a boxer collecting checks. She is a multi-platform enterprise. Fine. But once you sell yourself as an enterprise, you invite enterprise-level scrutiny. Third piece of visible evidence. The Atlanta event was promoted like a major proof-of-concept moment. WNEM described it as a pivotal test for the continued expansion of women's boxing as a premium live event in a major market. Claressa herself said Atlanta was about showing what women's boxing could do beyond Detroit. This is important because if you are telling the public, the media, the sponsors, and the fan base that this is a key commercial milestone, then whatever gets disclosed afterward is going to be treated like a referendum. That is the price of talking scale. You do not get to wear the crown of I am moving the business forward and then act shocked when people want to see the business numbers. Fourth piece of visible evidence. Claressa won the fight, and she won it convincingly. Bleacher Report's live coverage logged the bout on August 15, 2026 at State Farm Arena in Atlanta and described her stopping Kaye Scott by 6th round TKO at 138 after Scott's corner surrendered. The Guardian added more detail, reporting that Shields returned to 160 pounds, improved to 19-0, and did it in front of around 16,000 spectators. That is a real event, a real win, and a real crowd. So this is not a case where nothing happened and the whole conversation is fake. The fight had scale. The performance was strong. The platform was there. Which is exactly why the payday debate hit so hard. Fifth piece of visible evidence, and this is where everybody's blood pressure started rising. The most talked about number did not come from an official long-form press release celebrating Claressa's dominance. It came through public chatter tied to what people said were Georgia Commission filings, with a figure of $500,000 for Shields and a much smaller number for Kaye Scott being circulated heavily online. Now I need to be careful here, and I need all the keyboard prosecutors in the back to hear me clearly. I have not independently verified the underlying commission document myself. So this portion of the conversation has to stay in the lane of reportedly and widely circulated. But if that reported figure is accurate, then the internet reaction makes perfect sense. Because the issue is not that $500,000 is small. The issue is that $500,000 sounds wildly different from the atmosphere of every fight is on some next-level guarantee wave that many fans believed they were hearing. And this is why I keep telling people, never let charisma do accounting. Never let a headline become a ledger. Because what happens is the fan base hears one thing, the fighter implies another thing, the media packages it a third way, the bloggers chop it into clips, the timeline inflates it into a myth. And then one disclosed number lands, and suddenly everybody is screaming like they just discovered gravity. What did you think was going to happen? Did people think the internet would not compare the public brag to the public filing? Did they think social media was going to say, oh no, let's be polite and not do math today? Come on. This is boxing. This is the most receipt-hungry, pocket-watching, pride-driven ecosystem in sports. Of course the number became the story. And let me say this directly to the people who are trying to turn a basic audit question into hate. Asking whether an $8 million minimum guarantee across multiple fights somehow became a public impression of $2 million per night is not disrespect. That is literally the central question. Because if the answer is that people misunderstood the structure, then say that. If the answer is that bonus money, back-end money, sponsorship money, and disclosed purse money all sit in different buckets, then explain that. But if the answer is just, y'all are broke and mad, then that is not an explanation. That is PR for people who think volume is a substitute for clarity. And this is where I think we need to set the record straight on what is actually happening here, because the loudest voices around this story keep acting like numbers are feelings. And oh, do I have more? Because the purse talk is only half the story. The other half is the way Claressa's whole public image has been built into a content machine where every argument, every relationship headline, every podcast clip, every ban, every flex, every clapback gets folded back into the brand and treated like more proof that she is this unstoppable cultural force. So when the money conversation suddenly starts wobbling, it does not just shake one tweet. It shakes the whole presentation. And I already know the Captain Guarantee Defense Squad is going to come running with, you don't understand the business. Maybe. But I promise you, when we get to the difference between guaranteed contract value and disclosed event purse, some of the same people talking the loudest right now are going to realize they have been repeating marketing copy like it was bank paperwork. Now, let's get into the cultural evidence, because this is where the story stops looking like a clean boxing business debate and starts looking like a manufactured attention economy. S feature on Claressa's social media life did not hide what is going on. It described a fighter who gets non-stop opinions thrown at her from fans, celebrities, enemies, and bots, especially after her relationship with Papoose became public. The article flat out says she gets clowned, criticized, body-shamed, and turned into discourse every time she posts, and it quotes her saying, "I am the content." That is not a small quote. That is a giant quote. Because once a fighter sees herself not just as an athlete, but as the content itself, controversy stops being a side effect and starts becoming part of the engine. Think about how crazy that is for a second. I am the content. Translation: the line between the fight business and the attention business has basically dissolved. So if you are wondering why every Claressa conversation feels like it is happening at 11 out of 10, that is why. She is not merely responding to the algorithm. She is living in it. She is feeding it. She is weaponizing it, and sometimes it is weaponizing her right back. That is not me making up a narrative. That is the vibe laid out by a major sports outlet. So when the purse issue exploded, it did not land on a quiet, carefully curated public image. It landed on a career phase where drama and boxing are already braided together. Second piece of cultural evidence, the Wynn Records rollout itself leaned into spectacle. Hot 97 covered the Los Angeles signing party where Papoose publicly told Claressa, "I love you to death," celebrated her as the GWOT, and framed the $8 million arrangement as a major milestone. Went even further, presenting Claressa as the first athlete signed to Wynn Records, crossing from boxing into music while Papoose and Wynn executives talked about her broader influence. So now understand the optics. The business is not just being sold as boxing business. It is being sold as lifestyle, celebrity, relationship, music, empowerment, and expansion. That can help attention. It can help reach. It can also make every inconsistency hit harder because now people feel like they are not just evaluating a fighter. They are evaluating an entire multimedia rollout. Third piece of cultural evidence, the public feuds kept muddying the water around the brand. reported that Most Valuable Promotions banned Claressa from future events after her altercation with Alicia Baumgardner, saying a physical confrontation outside the ring was unacceptable. Also covered her subsequent response, where she fired back at Jake Paul and MVP, accused critics of hypocrisy, and dismissed the ban as meaningless. So while one side of Claressa's public life is historic contracts, cultural respect, and cross-industry blueprints, the other side is viral beefs, online wars, and sanctions from rival promotional spaces. Do you see the pattern? Every week the message seems to change. Is the brand discipline, or is the brand combustion? Is the image elite operator, or is the image permanent timeline turbulence? And before the fan club starts doing somersaults, let me give the counterargument its fair shot. The counterargument is that Claressa's noise is part of why she sells. That her willingness to engage, post, clap back, go on podcasts, and turn every week into an event is precisely why she moves tickets, gets headlines, and pulls new people into women's boxing. That argument is not stupid. In fact, there is real evidence behind it. Her Detroit numbers were strong. Atlanta drew big. She gets covered across sports and culture outlets, not just boxing sites. Fine. But here is where that argument falls apart if you push it too far. Attention can sell the event, but it cannot permanently replace trust. Once the fans begin to suspect that the image is overselling the economics, attention flips from asset to liability in one afternoon. Fourth piece of cultural evidence, even the side narratives around Claressa have started centering on proof, receipts, and contested claims. Recapped the back and forth with Layla Ali, noting that Ali posted a lengthy video with what the outlet described as receipts and documented evidence, while disputing Shields' claim around a $15 million offer. Again, I am not here to relitigate every part of that separate dispute. I am pointing out the pattern. Receipts, claims, counterclaims, videos, public challenges. That has become the ecosystem around Claressa. So when a reported purse number shows up and cuts against what a portion of the audience thought they had been hearing, it slots into an existing pattern of, wait, what is actually true here? Fifth piece of cultural evidence. The way Atlanta itself was sold culturally mattered. Quoted Claressa calling Atlanta Black Hollywood and talking about what it meant to headline State Farm Arena in that environment. WNEM described the city as a major cultural market where boxing, music, and celebrity could merge into a destination event. So when this all played out, it was not just a fighter getting checked by internet math. It was a whole aspirational narrative taking a hit in one of the exact cities meant to confirm it. And that is why people are not treating this like some little bookkeeping discrepancy that nobody should care about. The storytelling around this fight invited a bigger judgment. Now here comes the hard pivot, because this is the part too many people either do not understand or pretend not to understand. The real story is not 500,000 means Claressa is broke. That is lazy analysis from people who treat purse talk like gossip blog food. The real story is about financial language, deal architecture, and how combat sports brands deliberately let fans blur categories that should never be blurred. This is where the Wynn Spin machine really starts to show itself. First, systemic angle. Contract value is not event purse. That sounds basic, but boxing fans keep acting like it is some secret alien formula. A minimum guaranteed multi-fight partnership can include a signing bonus, fight purses, event-by-event guarantees, upside participation, sponsorship integration, appearance obligations, maybe even content and branding deliverables. If Shields got a $3 million signing bonus and an $8 million minimum across multiple fights, that does not automatically mean each individual commission disclosed purse has to read like $2 million. A disclosed purse can reflect one slice of compensation. It may not capture sponsor money. It may not capture bonus allocations. It may not capture back-end participation. It may not capture separate payments from related entities. And it definitely does not capture taxes, management splits, trainer percentages, promoter relationships, and camp costs after the fact. So let's be grown for a minute. If the reported Georgia figure is real, that alone does not prove Claressa fabricated every dollar she has ever mentioned. But, and this is the part the Miss 2 million a fight crowd does not want to hear, it absolutely does mean the public language around her earnings may have been allowed to drift into a far more inflated impression than the documented reporting justified. That is the whole point. Not that 500,000 is fake money. Not that she did not secure a major deal. The point is that minimum guaranteed across a package and guaranteed for one specific bout are not interchangeable. The moment fans, influencers, and maybe even the fighter herself start speaking like they are the same thing, the trap closes. Second systemic angle, modern boxing promotion is selling narratives to multiple audiences at the same time. One audience is the hardcore fan who cares about sanctioning bodies, weight classes, purse splits, and venue numbers. Another audience is the casual social media viewer who cares about virality, identity, celebrity optics, and status language. A third audience is the sponsor world, which wants proof that a fighter can exist beyond sports pages and generate culture moments. Claressa's partnership was explicitly described by Salida and Wynn as a way to blend boxing, culture, and music. That is not just a cute tagline. That is a monetization strategy. The athlete becomes a media property. The fight becomes an event product. The relationship becomes content. The walkout becomes branding. The post-fight clip becomes a social asset. The public starts hearing lifestyle numbers as if they are boxing-only numbers, because the package was designed to feel seamless. That is why I keep saying the public misunderstanding here did not happen by accident. It happened because ambiguity is useful. Ambiguity lets everybody take victory laps. Promoters can say historic guarantee. Media can say record-breaking deal. Fan pages can say highest paid ever. Podcasts can pull clips about giant numbers. The fighter can speak from the highest emotional version of the arrangement. And nobody has to stop the train and explain, in plain English, which dollars belong to which bucket. Why would they? Clarity shrinks the legend. Ambiguity expands it. Until, of course, some reported commission number hits the timeline and all that strategic vagueness becomes a boomerang. Third systemic angle. The attention economy punishes overstatement faster than ever. Claressa's own quote, "I am the content," is the key that unlocks this whole saga. Because if you are the content, you are no longer judged only by the official fight night result. You are judged by your consistency across every lane at once. If you say you're banned, people debate that. If you say you are unbothered, people compare that to how much you post. If you say your deal is transformative, people compare that to purse leaks. If you present yourself as the economic revolution in women's boxing, people will study every disclosed number like it is a Supreme Court exhibit. That is the trade-off. The same machine that multiplies your reach multiplies the cost of any mismatch between story and structure. And let's go one layer deeper, because this is where boxing gets especially slippery. Disclosed purses themselves are often an incomplete public instrument. Different commissions report different things. Some states disclose. Some do not. Some numbers reflect contractual guarantees filed for regulatory purposes, not the total final economics of the event. Some promoter structures use affiliated entities, bonuses, or other forms of compensation that are not neatly captured in a single public figure. So again, this is not me saying the commission-style number is the totality of Claressa's earnings from that weekend. I want that on the record. But the existence of those nuances is not a defense for sloppy public messaging. It is the opposite. It is the reason precise messaging matters more, not less. Because if you know the public cannot distinguish between disclosed purse, total compensation, contract minimum, signing bonus, sponsorship money, and back-end upside, then you have two choices. You can educate the audience carefully, or you can surf the confusion while the headlines make you look bigger. And for a long time, the Claressa business conversation benefited from the second path. Historic. Record-breaking. 8 million. 3 million signing bonus. First athlete at Wynn. Black Hollywood in Atlanta. Sellout talk. Cultural respect. All of that may be materially true in one form or another. But if the public comes away believing 2 million every fight, no questions asked, and then one night's reported regulatory figure lands way lower, the correction is going to be ugly no matter how many disclaimers the lawyers could write after the fact. So here is the major truth bomb, and I want everybody to hear it without trying to wriggle out of it with fan club gymnastics. The biggest problem for Claressa Shields is not that she reportedly made $500,000 for fighting Kaye Scott. The biggest problem is that the public brand around her money appears to have outrun the publicly documented language around her deal. That is the real exposure. Not poverty. Not failure. Exposure. Exposure to the consequences of letting people believe a minimum multi-fight guarantee was the same thing as a per-fight locked purse. Exposure to the consequences of building a promotional image where every headline sounds like another level up, but the granular math on a specific event can suddenly make the whole thing look like smoke and mirrors. And if the circulated number for Kaye Scott being under 70 grand is also accurate, then the discomfort gets even worse. Because now the story is not just, was Claressa overselling her own money? The story becomes, what exactly are we celebrating about the economics of women's boxing if the headline star's disclosed purse is causing confusion and the champion on the other side is reportedly nowhere near life-changing money? That is the part nobody wants to sit with. Because it forces the sport to confront the gap between symbolic progress and actual distribution. It forces everybody to ask whether the marketing is running ahead of the market. And that is a brutal question when the entire promotional strategy was designed to scream growth. What I think is happening here is simple. Claressa the fighter is still elite. Claressa the draw is still real. Claressa the headline maker is still potent. But Claressa, the public narrator of Claressa's own economics, may have let the story get too glossy, too broad, too dependent on emotional number talk instead of precise number talk. And once that happens, every enemy, every rival fan base, every bitter boxer, every cynical blogger, every bored timeline accountant gets handed a crowbar. They do not even need to hate you. They just need a discrepancy. You gave them one and now they are never going to stop hitting that spot. This matters for the culture because Claressa has been one of the loudest public advocates for women's boxing pay. If her messaging around money becomes something people mock instead of something they trust, it does damage beyond her. It gives cheap cynics an excuse to dismiss legitimate progress. It lets bad faith people say, see, none of these big women's boxing numbers are real, which is not a fair conclusion, but is absolutely the conclusion some people will race toward. It muddies the waters for every future negotiation, every future broadcast push, every future attempt to tell sponsors that the business is scaling. That is why I am not treating this like petty drama. This is a messaging failure with industry consequences. And the cruel irony is that none of this was necessary. Claressa did not need to sound like she was touching outer space money every night to still look successful. A historic multi-fight guarantee is already a story. A $3 million signing bonus is already a story. Selling 15,600 in Detroit is already a story. Drawing around 16,000 in Atlanta and making history at State Farm is already a story. Becoming the first athlete signed to Wynn Records is already a story. Winning another major fight and chasing more belts is already a story. She already had the ingredients. But Captain Guarantee wanted extra sauce. The public image wanted the flex to feel even bigger. And that is how you turn a genuine win into a suspicious one in the eyes of the internet. So who is actually winning here after all this noise? Honestly, the truth is winning. The fans who demand receipts are winning. The fighters who keep their money talk disciplined are winning. And yes, in a strange way, Kaye Scott's side of the story wins a certain kind of respect too, because while all the cameras were pointed at Claressa's aura, Kaye Scott walked into the biggest fight of her career without a giant mythology around fake luxury math. She came in as the champion at 160, fought the fight, took the loss, and left the conversation being discussed in terms of the reported economics of the sport rather than the inflation of her own image. There is something weirdly honorable about being the person who did not oversell the room. And I also think the disciplined version of Claressa, the Real fighter, the one who cuts the weight, sells the tickets, trains through camp, and performs under lights, is still salvageable from all this. That version of her is why any of this matters in the first place. That version is the one that packed Detroit. That version is the one that got major outlets to cover the Atlanta Players' history. That version is the one that can still chase Lauren Price, Tamara Thibault, or another big-name fight and make it matter. But the Wynn megaphone version, the permanent clapback version, the just let the flex ride version, that version is costing her trust. One person can sell the fight. Another can sell the fantasy. The problem starts when the fantasy begins overshadowing the fight. That is the contrast line for this whole story. Because as soon as your fan base has to spend more time explaining accounting categories than celebrating the victory itself, you have lost control of the message. And listen, I have been saying this for a minute, there is no faster way to turn admiration into side-eye than to talk like the ledger cannot be checked. In 2026, every receipt becomes content. Every filing becomes a debate stage. Every inconsistency becomes a thumbnail. Does everybody understand how crazy that actually is? So my controlled optimism here is this: the sport can still win if the spin stops. Women's boxing can still use Claressa as proof of commercial upside without pretending every phrase means more than it does. Claressa can still be a historic earner without pretending every event number needs to sound like a private jet riddle. Promoters can still celebrate growth without blurring disclosed purse, total comp, and contract value until fans cannot tell them apart. The evidence in front of us says the market is real. The evidence also says the messaging got reckless. Both things can be true at the same time. And this is only the start, because now there are at least 2 concrete things everybody should be watching next. Number 1, who Claressa targets at 160 and how that next fight is marketed. The Guardian reported that she named Lauren Price as a preferred next opponent and also mentioned the possibility of pursuing undisputed status at middleweight against Tamara Thibault. Watch the language around the next deal, the next guarantee, the next event, the next city, the next promise. Because after this controversy, the wording is part of the fight now. Number 2, keep your eye on the broader Claressa attention machine, MVP tension, Baumgartner energy, Wynn Records branding, podcast appearances, all of it. Because if she keeps leaning into I am the content, then every storyline is going to feed every other storyline. The boxing result will affect the business narrative. The business narrative will affect the social narrative. The social narrative will affect the sponsorship conversation. And the sponsorship conversation will swing right back into how future paydays are perceived. That loop is not going away. If anything, it just got tighter. So if you made it this far, you already know this was never just about $500,000. It was about the gap between a public myth and a public number. It was about how one of the greatest fighters of her era may have let branding language outrun precision. It was about whether the people around her are building a sustainable empire or just a louder echo. And, trust me, the next video in this story practically writes itself. If the next negotiation lands and the promotional language suddenly gets a lot more careful, that will tell you everything you need to know about whether this purse controversy actually hit home. Because the next shock is not going to be a knockout. The next shock is going to be whether the people who sold the fantasy learn how to speak in receipts.